Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Dear Jane. I am your host for today, Marcy Little, and I'm joined by Scott Baker. How's it going, Scott?
Hello. Going well. How are you?
Good. I'm excited for today's conversation. Today's guest has a lot of just a crazy story, and I'm excited for you guys to hear it. She is the host of a pro-life Christian podcast called Blind Mom Life that gives you a little bit of insight into her story. She has a lot to say that we cover in today's episode about IVF, about birth control, about what it's like to be blind and a mom and all the complications that come with that. But what you're going to hear is just an overwhelming passion for pro-life advocacy, and she's kind of given her life to that. So I'm excited for you to hear from her. Before we dive into today's conversation, Scott, will you please tell us about today's sponsor, Choose Life Marketing?
Choose Life Marketing is the premier marketing agency for pregnancy centers and pro-life organizations across the country. They are unmatched in terms of their ability to help, especially pregnancy centers all across the country, get their message out, help build their awareness. You know, how many times have we heard from our pregnancy center friends that there's sort of like an awareness deficit in the community? We hear stories all the time of women talking about, geez, if I had only known there was a pregnancy center down the road. Well, Choose Life Marketing is really passionate about addressing that. Everybody at Choose Life Marketing is pro-life, but they also are very passionate about using the latest technology and the latest data and the latest delivery methods to make sure they are reaching her. And so you need to check them out. If you're a PRC or any kind of pro-life organization, we would strongly encourage you to check out chooselifemarketing.com.
Thanks, Scott. Let's hop into today's conversation. Chelsey, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you so much, Marcy and Scott. I'm so excited to be here.
Yep, we're excited for today's conversation. I wanted to start out, you say on your website, I am surrounded by medical mistakes, but my life is not an accident. That's a very provocative statement. Can you tell us a little bit about your story and how that's propelled you to where you are today and what you do?
Absolutely. So I have a bit of a rare testimony because it is just so wide and diverse. I was conceived through IVF. I was blinded by birth control pills, and I was pressured to abort my son after prenatal diagnosis. And that is a lot of mistakes being made by modern women's healthcare in regard to me, in regard to my son, in regards to the advice that I was given. But God is using all of those things in my life to make me an advocate for life. And some days it's harder than others to face all of those consequences and all of the aftermath of all of that. But I'm mostly just excited to see what God is going to do with it and how he's already using it to help other people.
So Chelsey, you talk about in your story, you talk about how the birth control that you were on at a younger age really impacted your life and caused blindness. Walk us through that process and how that happened.
Yes. So when I was 19 years old, I had just gotten engaged to my high school sweetheart, Austin, and I did what I thought I was supposed to do. I went to sit down with my primary care physician, talk over my birth control options. It's what all the good little Protestant girls were told to do. And I remember expressing to her, I wanted to make sure I picked something safe, something where I didn't have to worry about any risk being posed to implantation of a fertilized egg, trying to explain my concerns to her. And she just looked at me like I was stupid. Like my concerns were the dumbest thing she'd ever heard in her life. And now at the age of 29, I would be like, oh, okay, whatever, lady. But at 19, that really impacted me. And I just caved in that moment. And I said, sure, fine, just give me whatever. I just wanted to be out of that uncomfortable situation. And so I started taking birth control pills. And within 2 weeks, I had a pulmonary embolism. I was in the hospital. I almost died. Later, I started getting frequent headaches. I remember carrying a bottle of Tylenol around with me wherever I went. And I just thought I was really stressed out because I was planning a wedding. My grandfather had just committed suicide. I was under a lot of stress for my family and going to college and summer classes. So I didn't make the connection that something could be going on. So until on our way back from our honeymoon, the headache just wouldn't go away. Tylenol would not take the edge off anymore. When I try to go to class, I would throw up in the parking lot at college, and I just didn't understand what was going on. I went back to see that same primary care physician, and she just told me I was stressed out, and I just needed to calm down. There's nothing wrong with me. She didn't know what the big deal was, and I believed her. So for the next 2 months, my vision started to blur, and I just thought I needed to get a new pair of glasses. I had just moved into my apartment with my husband. I thought, oh, these light bulbs are really dim in here. What's going on? This is so strange. But it wasn't until I found a doctor who would actually listen to me that she told me I had pseudotumor cerebri. And because there had been such a delay in my medical care, I lost almost all of my vision. And months later, when I was sitting in my house, listening to the TV, trying to figure out how I was going to put my life back together, I started to see all these ads for pseudotumor cerebri lawsuits, suing Yasmin, Mirena, all these birth control companies, because apparently they knew that these pills can cause pseudotumor cerebri, vision loss, eventually death if it's not corrected, and they didn't say anything. They didn't put the warning labels on the bottles, so doctors didn't know. And I was stunned. I knew that had been issues with birth control medications causing things like blood clots, which had already happened to me, but I had no idea it could cause vision loss. And because my doctor didn't even know to look for that at the time, it became permanent.
I'm just sitting here in shock. Like you, I know there are side effects and risks associated with so many different types of birth control, but the fact that they they pushed it to market knowing such serious side effects and risks would be involved just is unconscionable.
Yes, and it's still on market too. It's something that it still causes. It's not as common as the blood clots, I believe, but it still happens to other women where they can have pseudotumor cerebri and they just don't even realize it because it just starts out as a headache. And you're like, oh, I'm so stressed out. I need to calm down. You don't think, oh, maybe I'm going blind from my
Right,
birth control
right.
pills.
Wow. Wow. So I've always been interested and obviously a lot of people are born
Hmm.
blind, but then when you have sight and lose it, that's just a different context altogether. How did you cope with that? How to talk us? You talked about trying to put your life together, that sort of thing. Walk us through the aftermath and how you dealt with it.
It was really hard. I have a really bad habit of shoving down negativity or negative emotions and really just kind of pushing through with almost like a state of denial sometimes. And that's really what I did for that whole first year of my blindness. It also was the first year of my marriage. And me and my husband just being like, okay, what is this going to be like? And unfortunately, I spent a lot of time just sitting on the couch, not really knowing what to do. I it was just it's not what you expect to happen when you just gotten married. I was we had been married 3 months when I was told that I had pseudotumor cerebri, and only 4 months, 5 months when I was told that I was not going to get the vision back. And it took a while for me to even have the motivation to really examine what's my life going to look like now. I think it was about a year before I sought any kind of rehabilitation training, before I started to get in classes to learn how to use a white cane, to learn how to cook for myself, take care of my household. It was a really slow process, and I know that it can be a lot harder for other people too. It is normal for people who suddenly lose their vision to be suicidal. It's a lot for people to take in, but what I kept going back to is my faith and knowing that there's a purpose for me, even if I don't see it. It's not that God's mad at me because I took these pills. It's not that I did something wrong. This is the hand that I'm dealt, and I just got to keep leaning on him and keep trying.
Wow. There's so much resilience there. So I'm thinking about your, you find out you're going to be blind. You're blind. You're working through that rehabilitation, figuring out what life is going to look like. At what point because I know one of your pregnancies, your child had got a
Mhm.
negative prenatal diagnosis, and you were you were encouraged to abort. Walk us through that time in your life. How soon was that after you became blind, and why did the OBGYN make that recommendation?
Yes, so it was about 7 years after losing my vision. It was my son, my second pregnancy, and I was about 12 weeks along, and I was so excited to be pregnant. Like my son was completely intentional. We already had a beautiful little girl. We'd done the at-home blood test. We found out he was going to be a boy. We were so excited. And when I entered the Oklahoma Children's Hospital, I was not worried. I wasn't worried at all. I'd already kind of gotten out the kinks of blind motherhood and how scary that is with my daughter, and now I was just so excited to have another baby. But when we had that 12-week ultrasound, they found a mass in his abdomen so large that when my husband saw it on the screen, he thought it was his brain. Not only could no specialist in the entire state of Oklahoma diagnose it, none of them had ever
Wow.
seen anything like it. So the first thing they said was, we need to talk about termination. I don't do that. It came out of my mouth so quickly. It felt like a muscle reflex, but it didn't even register with the maternal fetal medicine specialist. He just continued on as if my words didn't matter, as if my baby didn't matter. He wanted me to continue and get an amniocentesis at 16 weeks. He told me it wouldn't be as correct at 16 weeks, but he wanted to get an answer very quickly. Later, when he called me on the phone, I was asking him, I don't really understand why I'm going to risk a miscarriage with an amniocentesis. I have to go off my anticoagulant medication to go under this procedure. That's dangerous for me. Is this going to affect the plan of care for Dallas? Is this going to help him at all if you find a diagnosis through this amniocentesis? And he said, well, I mean, yeah, it'll affect like the plan of care. Like if he has trisomy 13, he's not going to live that long anyway. So we would never do something like an emergency C-section for him. And I was just shocked because I thought my son was
Right.
the patient. And in that moment, I realized my doctor didn't think that at all. My son was the problem. He told me that I needed to do the amniocentesis because abortions get more expensive the
Wow.
longer you wait. At a third appointment after I'd filed a complaint with the hospital, he came in and offered termination again. This time my husband stepped in and said to him, no, you really need to understand. Termination, we're not going to do that. That's not something we want. That's not something my wife's want. We've said that. This is not what we're doing. And still, when he was leaving that room, he threw over his shoulder, if your son comes back with a positive CMV test, which he'd warned us could cause mental retardation, mental delays, you can still get the abortion. Don't worry. And I just snapped. I was so angry. I was so hurt. It really hurt me on two levels because on one hand, he was telling me that I didn't love my son enough to be okay if he was disabled. And on the other hand, I wanted to scream, I'm disabled. Like, do you not think that I
Mm-hmm.
deserve to be here? I was just, I was so racked with grief because I was so worried about my son, and I was just so enraged. I didn't know what to do. And I finally realized I need someone on my side, and I know exactly who I could call. And I called the closest pregnancy resource center I could find, which was Hope Pregnancy Center of South Oklahoma City. And they really walked me through what my options were, what my rights were. They reminded me that I did not have to put up with bullying from my doctor. That's not normal. That's not okay. And I could find other people to see me. And they really just gave me that encouragement, and that really just that just embrace, even over the phone, to just help me keep fighting and say, enough is enough. You don't get to talk to me like that. I'm keeping my son. I don't care what you think is wrong with him.
That's just a whole microcosm of the whole abortion is healthcare, isn't it? It's just
Yeah.
about addressing what the woman's needs are at the moment and not even giving thought to the baby.
Well, it wasn't even addressing my needs though, because I told him over and over again that I wanted my son. And I remember asking him to be very clear. I was like, is my son's abnormal ultrasound going to cause any issues with my health? And he said, oh no, 100% not. Even if he has trisomy 18, trisomy 13, no, no, no. Like, I'm not worried about your health at all. So it wasn't about what I needed. And I noticed that they did not stop asking me if I wanted an abortion until I reached the 20-week mark. And this was before the Dobbs decision. So in Oklahoma, it was legal until 20 weeks. And then somehow magically, that was the first appointment that I
Wow.
didn't hear the word termination. It was, on one hand, the the optimist in me thinks that my complaints finally made it to the right person, the doctor finally understood, but then the pessimist in me knows that they sell abortions there. And once I hit 20 weeks, they couldn't
Mm.
make any money off of me anymore. So what was the point of pressuring me?
Wow. So, yeah, again, I'm just speechless at how you have been treated and mistreated by the medical community. How is your son today?
My son is perfectly healthy. At 20 weeks, they realized that it was likely non-serious liver calcifications, and they got smaller and smaller until a month before he turned 1 year old, they completely vanished. They were gone. And I remember in that first appointment, I asked the maternal fetal medicine specialist, I said, is there any way this mass can go away on its own? And he said, absolutely not. There's no way. And yet, that's exactly where we were. My son was born May 4th, 2022, and I remember holding him in the hospital in this miracle moment, knowing that he was going to be okay, he was going to be fine, and watching Roe versus Wade get overturned on the news. It was just this incredible moment where God showed up. Like, two things I was told was never possible were happening in the same moment, and it was just overwhelming to know that in all that time where I felt, so scared about losing my son, or so discouraged in the pro-life movement, especially after being harassed myself about abortion. I was like, does God even care? Is he even listening? And in that one moment, that one picture that I have in my heart of holding him and listening to the news, I'm like,
Wow.
God was there. He was there the whole time. And I have a perfectly healthy, redheaded 2-year-old boy who's insane, as toddler boys are. And he's amazing.
So this isn't very Christ-like of me, but my what I would want to do is take your son to that original doctor and say, "I'd like you to meet my perfectly healthy son." Have you ever been tempted to do that?
Everybody says that to me, Scott, and I haven't been able to do it yet. I'm just really, it is so much emotionally on me. I've really thought, like, should I reach out to that doctor? Should I try to write him a letter? Should I try to say something? And maybe I'm just a selfish person, but the the human part, like the selfish part of me, doesn't think he deserves
Mm.
to see a picture of my son. And
Mm.
that's probably not right of me. And I'm still working on that. I make myself pray for this doctor every Sanctity of Human Life Day. I force myself to do it. But it's hard. It's really, really hard.
I think of all the other women who receive news like that and they don't have either the supportive community or their faith isn't there, and they cave to that. And I just wonder how often doctors get it wrong. It's also crazy to me that no one in the state of Oklahoma could tell you what exactly it was, but this doctor was convinced whatever it was not going away on its own. It's just unbelievable.
Yes. After I'd given birth, I had a whole team assigned to me at the Oklahoma Children's Hospital. I didn't have just one doctor at that time, so it was a different maternal fetal medicine specialist who came into my room to discharge me. And as soon as he left, he came right back in. He was like, Chelsey, can you please tell me what your baby had? I was like, what are you talking about? He's like, your baby. Like, I saw that ultrasound. I had no idea what it was. I called colleagues. I Googled it. I got out my textbooks from college. We had no
Wow.
idea what was wrong with your son. And, and so I just told him, I said, it was really, really hard for you guys, on me, for you guys not to know, but I want to give you access to all of his medical notes moving forward so you can see that, because it was nothing. Um, 60% of women who receive the prenatal diagnosis of liver
Mm.
calcifications choose abortion, even though 90% of those babies require no medical intervention. And that's not 90% of them end up being end up living. That's 90% they don't even have to have a surgery. They're totally fine on their own. And yet when the doctors come at you with like, oh, this could be really
Mm.
bad, we don't know, women get really scared. They get really freaked out
Hmm.
and they make these rash decisions about
Mhm.
termination.
Yeah, and that's what I was thinking of when I'm with you, Marcy. As Chelsey was, as she's telling her story, I'm thinking, how many women out there were
Mhm.
not as adamant as Chelsey? I mean, time and time again, you're told, you need to have a termination, and you're like, no, and no. There. We've talked about this before. It's hard when you're hearing from your medical professional that this is really the only way. It's hard to ignore that. And so, of course, if there's one story like this, there's probably hundreds. That same doctor,
Hmm.
women
Mhm.
who did give in to what he was saying.
Yeah. And the thing, I think that the doctor, he didn't know who he was messing with. I've been a very enthusiastic pro-lifer since I was 12 years old. I remember like getting off the bus from school and my brother and sister would go ride bicycles or play video games and I would go upstairs, get on my computer and I would like look up abort73.com and I research how these abortion procedures work. It was a very strange hobby of mine. So yes, my mom was not a big fan because I would try to bring it up at dinner conversations in front of my brother and sister who were only 10. And it was a very, a very bizarre interest of mine. And I never really knew why I was just so compelled to do something about the pro-life movement, about the abortion issue. So when this doctor said, use these sanitized terms with me, he was like, well, termination, that depends on if you want to move forward. I didn't hear the word termination because I knew the name of the procedure. I knew the name of the clamp that they would use to rip his legs off. Like I knew exactly what he was talking about. So I couldn't be manipulated. I couldn't be lied to because I knew everything. And that really was, I think, God's plan for me. And it was such a long way to get there because I had my son when I was 26 years old. And I started researching pro life issues
Mm.
when I was 12. So I didn't know that 14 years later, all of that research would actually be for something more meaningful than I could have ever
Wow.
imagined.
Wow. Part of your story that we haven't gotten to yet revolves around IVF. You say that you're a survivor of IVF. Talk to us about that. IVF is in the news, obviously, a lot right now. Um, kind of unpack that for us.
Yes. So I was conceived in a laboratory in 1994, and I was very luckily for me, the parents that raised me are my biological parents. My mom was able to carry me, but that was not the case for all of my siblings. My mother, after her second pregnancy, where she delivered my brother and sister, who are twins, she was told by her doctor that she shouldn't have any more children, that it would be too much on her body. but she still had embryos left. And she chose, along with my father, to destroy the embryos. And that is really hard because they never kept it a secret from me when I was a kid. As soon as I could understand what in vitro fertilization was, I understood that that's how I came to be. It wasn't a secret in my household, but it is hard knowing that I have siblings that were killed, and I won't even know how many there were. I won't know if it was brothers or sisters, and it is really hard knowing that my existence is almost arbitrary because I was just randomly selected out of a bundle of my siblings, and I just got to be the lucky one that was chosen to be given a chance at implantation. And that is really difficult because so many people just look at IVF and they're like, oh, isn't that so wonderful? It's so fantastic. These people got to have a baby. Yes, babies are wonderful. But what about the babies that didn't even get a chance? What about my siblings? Are they just so easily forgotten? And I know that it's starting to be talked about more and more, but there's so many people in the Republican Party, and even many pro-lifers who will assert that these embryos don't count. And it's so frustrating to me because I was one of those embryos. And it assumes this kind of womb privilege that you only count as a life if you were created in a uterus. And that's ridiculous because I am just as much made in the image of God as anyone else. Just because I was made in a petri dish doesn't mean that my life counts less. And it doesn't mean that my siblings' lives counted less either.
And that's really compelling. Why do you think, like Marcy mentioned, it is in the news a lot, and we've seen like in Alabama and other states. Why do you think that that's lost? What you just said is lost on so many pro-lifers.
I think a lot of pro-lifers don't understand how in vitro fertilization works. I don't think they realize that you can harvest up to 50 eggs at a time from an egg donor. You can fertilize all of them. You can make mistakes about which sperm sample you're using and accidentally fertilize the wrong spouses together. They don't realize that when you fertilize 50 eggs, what happens to them? No woman wants to give birth 50 times. Like, as much as you love your children, that's not really something that you dream about doing. So what happens to those babies? And I came from a very advantaged place in this conversation because I've known about IVF since I was 10 years old. And so I've had the time to look it up and understand. But most people haven't. They just don't think about it. And it's only starting to be, I think, normal really within the past 10 years that people even announce that they are going through IVF treatment. I know when my parents got pregnant with me in 1994, I don't think they announced it to everyone on the block that I was through in vitro. It was just something that we knew inside my family. But now it's starting to be a thing a lot more. It's a lot easier to see how grotesque it can be with designer babies when you're selecting the one that you want just based on how it's going to look. And I think unfortunately, the more evil the embryo destruction and the IVF, the surrogacy industry gets, the more aware the rest of the world is going to get about how these children have been being abused for decades now.
It's fascinating to watch different politicians, other media types discuss this issue and realize how little they do seem to understand, or that they just don't have a consistent pro-life ethic when it comes to IVF. And I wonder if, how do we go about correcting that? Do churches need to talk about it more? It's such an emotionally charged issue now too, because so many people have been a part of it. But I'm curious your thoughts on how do we begin reforms in this area, or helping people understand what's really at stake?
You're right. It is so frustrating. I think as far as like the politicians go, I think what they're trying to do is they're trying to play both sides of the issues. They don't want to get labeled as the crazy, psycho, pro-lifers who want to ban IVF and keep people from having babies. So they acquiesce to IVF and they say, "Oh, I support it. Oh, it's great." Like I was a big fan of Ted Cruz, and now he's pushing IVF as a right. It's like, okay, but are you pushing embryo destruction as a right? Like, what exactly are you talking about here? I thought you were pro-life. That's not pro-life. And on one hand, I understand in a way, because if you can't win an election, you can't pass pro-life laws. So I get from that angle, but if you're not even going to stand up for pro-life issues, for the rights of the unborn, then what exactly are you winning the elections for anyway? So it's very frustrating. And I think it is going to have to come down to more of a social pressure of looking at it and saying, that's not okay. It's not okay that you made 20 embryos and you decided you just didn't want the other 5 that are still in the freezer because you've already had enough babies and you don't want to get more stretch marks. That's really not okay. You need to do something about that instead of just saying, "Oh, well, those babies, they just didn't count," because that makes me feel better. And I'm, in a way, like, I am excited that the Southern Baptist Convention just came out against IVF. But as a member of Southern Baptist Church almost my entire life, I also know that I don't think it's going to do that much, because Baptists, we are not very hierarchical, if that's even a word. So most Baptists who go to church, we don't even know what the Southern Baptist Convention is doing. It's not something we actively pay attention to. So it's not enough to just say, "Oh, we made this like referendum or decision from a convention thousands of miles away from your actual home church." We have to be talking to each other about it. And is it invasive and awkward? Yeah, it's super awkward to talk to your friend about their reproductive status. It's super weird. But I've always been that person. So just hopefully we can get some other people to be that person as well, because it is something that my mom has dealt with. That is something that she regrets. Disposing of those embryos is not something she is proud of. It is something that hurts her. It's something that's hurt my family. And if someone else had been there to really explain what was going on, I think that things could have been different. I think that options could have, she could have seen different options. Even if she was told, "You can't have any more children," she could have done something else besides having those embryos destroyed. But because the only person talking to her was her doctor, because no one thought they could get involved besides her doctor, that was the only option she was given. It's, "You can't have these babies, so you can donate them to science or you can destroy them. These are your options." And that's just, it's not okay.
You know, what's interesting is I consider your story. I almost said it in total. You're only 29, so it's like, not like your story's written. But from conception to the blindness to being almost coerced into having an abortion with your second pregnancy, to me, your story really is an example of women's strength, of just how strong women are, and that flies in the face of the pro-abortion message, because it's always about, well, women can't do this and this. You can't have a baby and have a good job, or you can't attain your dreams and have a family. Why do you think? And again, your story's just a proof that that's not true. Why do you think that message is lost on so many abortion supporters?
That is, I don't know. Maybe it's just because I'm a pro-lifer, because I'm with you. I see it so obvious. Like when that doctor came in and just implied, like, "Oh, you're disabled, the baby's disabled, you can't do this." I didn't think like, "Oh, maybe he's right. I can't do this." I just got angry. I was like, "Yes, I can do this.
Yeah.
I don't know how I'm going to do this." I'm like, I'm too scared to measure my perfectly healthy daughter's Tylenol right now without a sighted person checking it. But I'm going to figure out the tubes and the bags and the wires. Like, we're going to do it. We're going to figure this out. But I think one huge thing is most pro-lifers lean into Christianity. That is something that comes up as an overlap a lot more, I think, than people who are pro-abortion. And so when we see the impossible, we're reminded of Philippians 4:13. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. We're reminded of 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 9. My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. These are the things that come to our mind. And I think until we can really point everybody back to Christ being our strength and Christ being the power that we have access to, they are going to think that they're not strong enough. They are going to think that they're too weak to do these things. And I don't know how to communicate it to them without pointing back to Christ is the light in your life. That's what you need. That's the strength that you have to tap into if you're ever going to face anything difficult in life.
Well, and it's an incredible opportunity to have those conversations. Sometimes as a fellow believer, it's hard to think about, or like hard to figure out sometimes, how do I have conversations about my faith and about Christ? And I think exactly what you just said is right. We have to use these cultural moments and cultural issues to point people back to, this is an overwhelming situation and it is challenging, but there's hope and there's light and life for those who are part of Christ's family. So I think that's really important. Chelsey, I think you're really involved in the Amendment 4 fight in Florida. Can you tell us, for people who don't understand or maybe haven't heard yet about Amendment 4, what that is and why it's such a big deal for Florida?
Yes. So Florida is my birth state. And after spending some time in Oklahoma, me and my husband, we moved back here a couple years ago. And we are facing Amendment 4 in November. And what it will do is it will basically get rid of every regulation, every kind of law about abortion in the state. It will legalize abortion in all 9 months of pregnancy. It will make it where the government can't even pass basic regulations on abortion facilities. They won't even have to be as regulated as veterinary clinics anymore. It's basically the Wild West of abortion is what we're looking at in November if Amendment 4 passes. We just, in Florida, May 1st, we just had the heartbeat bill go into actual effect, which is a 6-week protection for women and children for pregnancy. And it will be completely undone if Amendment 4 passes. It is horrifying the good that will be undone if this happens. And so I'm trying really hard to get as involved as I can. I'm dedicating huge sections of my season 2 of my podcast, Blind Mom Life, to really sharing the stories that poke holes in Amendment 4. We're doing an episode called The Truth About Miscarriage that will be coming out in the fall, because they're already running ads saying things like, if Amendment 4 doesn't pass, then women aren't going to have access to care for incomplete miscarriages, and then they're going to die of sepsis, and you don't want that. That would be horrible. So vote yes on Amendment 4. And it's so not true. It's so manipulative. It's so gross. So I'm really trying to use pro-life stories to show you don't have to be scared of the heartbeat bill. You don't have to be scared of pro-life protections, because not only do they help children, they help women. I just had a meeting with the president of the Pregnancy and Family Resource Alliance here in Florida. And what she was telling me about her pregnancy centers is that the media would have had you believe that when the Florida heartbeat bill went into effect, women would be hysterical coming into pregnancy resource centers, finding out they're 5 weeks, 3 days pregnant. They only have a few more days to figure out their abortion, or they're going to be saddled with a baby for the rest of their lives. But what's actually happening is these women are coming in, finding out they're 5 weeks, 3 days pregnant, and they're letting out a sigh of relief. Because up to close to 70% of women who have an abortion report feeling pressured or coerced. So when a woman comes in and she's in a not great relationship with her boyfriend, and she is that close to the cutoff for abortion in Florida, she can now put all of the ownership on the state of Florida and go back to her boyfriend and say, my hands are tied, babe. I couldn't do anything. It was too close to the cutoff. And that's not what we would think women would want to do. But when you're in an abusive relationship, when you're in a toxic relationship, when your boyfriend says, get the abortion or get out of my apartment, or I'm going to divorce you, what it's so empowering for the women to be able to say, I can't have one. I don't know what you want from me. Sorry. And what they're able to do is they're able to keep the baby that they really did want to keep. And that's why when these women are coming into the centers now, they're relieved about the heartbeat bill. And Amendment 4 will completely take that protection away from them.
I think people across the country need to realize that Florida is a fight that we can win as a movement. You've got the 60% threshold that is necessary,
Yes.
which is good. But Florida is such a pivotal state in so many ways in the country and really sets the tone. But we can win there. What do you think it's if you could boil it down to one or two key things, what do you think is going to happen for us to win in Florida?
We have to get the churches involved, is my opinion. A lot of the pregnancy resource centers are getting involved. They're hosting educational events, informational meetings where they discuss Amendment 4. They explain it in great detail, much greater than I can remember without being able to read notes on this podcast. And they just really help people feel equipped to have these conversations. But not that many people are willing to show up to a pregnancy resource center on a Thursday night in the rain at 8 p.m. to talk about Amendment 4. But a lot of people are ready to talk about that in their churches, to hear about life, to hear about protecting women. And we really have to figure out how we're going to get these churches to understand that not only is this a good topic to speak on, it is important. It is necessary. We have to stand up for our women. We have to stand up for our children, because otherwise, what are we doing as Christians? What are we doing as churches if we're not willing to talk about this? And there's so much money being poured into the pro-abortion side from Planned Parenthood, just trying to fund all of this to pass Amendment 4. So we are David versus Goliath when you look at it that way. I mean, pregnancy resource centers are not floating in the cash. We don't charge for services, unlike Planned Parenthood. So we really have to equip all of the resources that we have, and the biggest one we have that I don't think has been taken advantage of enough is the churches.
I think you're right. I think data coming out of what happened in Ohio with issue 1 supports that, of the churches where pastors were talking to their people about it. People voted against it, and we just didn't see enough engagement from Protestant or Catholic churches to be able to turn the tide there. But hopefully that's a warning for other states. I live in Colorado, and we have a similar amendment being proposed for our ballot as well. So, there are a handful of states that are going to face that. And I think you're right. I think the church is going to have to be a part of that. Chelsey, thank you so much for your time today. This has been such a good conversation. Thank you for all you do, not just here, but on your own podcasts and in other places to share your message, because I think that it's one that people need to hear. We need to wrestle with a lot of the things that you personally have wrestled with, and come to better consensus and align our beliefs within the pro-life movement around these really important issues. So thanks for helping people think well about that. Thank you for your time today. It's been great talking with you.
Thanks again for joining us here on Dear Jane. I'm Scott Baker. She is Marcy Little.